Since they say women lack reason, all their words should be excused. A capable woman is much better than 1,000 incapable men. A clear-headed woman is much better than 1,000 muddle-headed men. Almost 600 years after Mihri lived, women are still dealing with the same issues today and still fighting the good fight. This comes from the Tazarun Name, which was a prayer or petition composed in 461 couplets by Mihri Hatun. She's essentially saying that if women are stupid, then let them say whatever they want. But then she's countering that saying, actually, y'all are patronizing me, giving me money, proves that women are capable and women aren't ignorant. And even if they were, gender has nothing to do with intelligence. In the 15th century, as the Ottoman Empire was reaching new levels of imperial glory, poetry became a very powerful political tool. But it wasn't only political, it was also artistic, and it was an artistic world that men dominated. And into that world stepped Mihri Hatun, a woman who wrote about love and desire and did so in a very public way, and therefore kind of defied expectations of what women were supposed to be like. So to understand Mihri, we need to understand the context that she was born into. She was born in 1460 in Amasya, Turkey. Amasya is a northern city, and at the time was an intellectual and artistic hub. It was kind of to be a little anachronistic, it was kind of like the Oxford of Anatolia of Turkey. It was governed at the time by Ottoman princes. When Sultan Bayezid II was a prince, he was sent to govern the city. He was really surrounded by artists and scholars and poets. So really the court in Amasya, the provincial court, was kind of like a small version of the court in Constantinople, the capital. And this was the world where Mihri came into being. She was the daughter of a judge called a Qadi, and these were judges who were experts in Islamic law. So she grew up in an educated, literate household. More importantly, her father really made sure that she got an education. During Mihri's time, Sibyan Mektepleri, so primary schools, were financed by private individuals, and they were available to boys and girls. But women, when they grew up, so the girls, when they grew up and became women, did not have any private institutes at which to be taught. Unlike many of the women of her time, as a girl in an elite household, she learned several languages, her native Turkish, and then the artistic language of Persian, and then the academic language of Arabic. She read lots of poetry, mythology, and she didn't only read it, but she learnt how to write it. We're not exactly sure about her early life, but we do know that her poetry was discovered and became very popular. She wrote poetry in the ghazal form, which explored themes of longing, beauty, love, and often drew on Sufi imagery. What made her unique was not only her playful voice, but also that she questioned a lot of the norms and the ideals of her time. She was unapologetically female. She was not embarrassed of her womanhood, and she stood up for it. She openly wrote about being a lover in a time when a woman was supposed to be the beloved. She was supposed to be passive, and the man was supposed to be the active character. He was supposed to be the lover. So she really flipped gender norms on its head, and this made people notice her. By the 1480s, Mihri had gained recognition outside of Amasya. She found patronage under Prince Ahmed, who was the son of Sultan Bayezid II, who also governed Amasya. Bayezid II's gift registry actually refers to Mihri's full name. As Didem Havlioğlu notes, we can assume that Mihri was friends with Bayezid and Müeyyedzadeh, and that she frequented Bayezid's son Ahmed. She also presented her divan, so her collection of works, to Bayezid, and one of the remaining copies has a seal of Bayezid, meaning that it was probably presented to him, which is just amazing. Like many Ottoman poets, Mihri was patronized by wealthier and more powerful people. Her works praise Prince Ahmed's justice and wisdom. While subtly celebrating her own intellectual wit, she maintained a circle of correspondence with other scholars and poets. Her name appears in Latifi's Tezkire, written around 1546. A Tezkire is an anthology of poets, and he wrote an entry dedicated to her, which was very rare at the time, to write an entry in a Tezkire about female poets. Latifi calls her a woman of pure faith and chaste heart, but also admits that her verses possessed a passion equal to that of the greatest men. Mihri Hatun wrote in the Ottoman poetic tradition, which combined Turkish, and Persian and Arabic imagery. Her poems are rich in metaphor, but beneath these traditional symbols, her verses reveal something much more personal. It's how a woman is negotiating her way with desire as a being in an era, in a place where women were seen as accessories and objects, and on a hierarchy were lesser to men. So there's this tension between what's expected of her and the things that she wants to express in her work. While her male contemporaries could use erotic imagery really freely, she was more restricted because she was a woman, and according to the norms of femininity at the time, women were supposed to be modest and they weren't supposed to talk about sexual things. They were supposed to protect their honor that way. And some scholars like Didem Havlioğlu in Mihri Hatun, Performance, Gender Bending and Subversion in Ottoman Intellectual History, argue that Mihri deliberately played with gender norms, adopting both masculine and feminine voices. For example, in one poem, she writes from the perspective of the lover pursuing a male beloved, which is a role reserved for men. This gender inversion wasn't just playful, it was actually intellectual commentary. It was like feminist commentary. It showed that poetic identity, a woman's identity, could transcend the limits of what was okay at the time. Mihri Hatun's later life is very obscure. We think she died around 1515, possibly in Amasya, but we don't have a grave. Because Ottoman history has been written from the perspective of men, by men, for so many years, she was kind of written out of the history books as well. Luckily enough, we have amazing modern scholars like Didem Havlioğlu who are trying to bring Mihri Hatun's voice back to give her the recognition that she deserves. Mihri's story makes us challenge what we think of as Ottoman intellectual history and women's roles. She reminds us that women weren't silent observers, that they were there, they were contributing, they were an equal part, but they have been forgotten. But they have been written out. So later writers like Evliya Çelebi actually note that she wasn't only a poet, but that she wrote important writings on Islamic law, menstruation and purpura. She was an intellectual and a writer, and more than just a poet. One really interesting aspect of her life is that she had a lifelong relationship with a man named Müeyyedzade Abdurrahman Çelebi. When he was a young scholar and a resident of Amasya, he became acquainted with Mihri Hatun. The two possibly developed feelings for each other. He later on became very successful as the Kadı Asker, so as the chief military magistrate. In his own poetry, he references Mihri. So they did have a kind of master-apprentice type relationship going on. We don't know if it was just a professional relationship, but it's likely that they had feelings for each other. Although she frequently referenced her male colleagues' names in her poetry, there's not really evidence that they replied to her other than Makami. So Makami was another poet and he engaged in a political dialogue with her. He was also an imam and a musician. What's really interesting is that he wrote about Mihri as his beloved. Maybe he was in love with her, we don't know. He wrote, "Truly your lip was once the water of life to him," referring to himself. "You didn't grant it to that ailing one and he died. Truly you were once at the top of the list of beauties. Now your time has passed. Makami passed in exile and you never once said to him, 'Come here and wait at my threshold.' If you should pass by her grave, you should hear the green plants there calling out, 'Mihri, Mihri.'" According to Havlioğlu, he's talking about her in the past tense, and so it could be that he wrote this after her death. We have another poem about her appearance, which is like very, very uncommon in Ottoman poetry to directly reference a known woman's appearance. And he talks about how she had peach fuzz on her face, a mole on her cheek, and curly lashes. Each one of them is black, painful pang to the sick at heart. Oh my god. You know, in TikTok comments, it's like men used to go to war. It's like men used to write poetry like this. So he's really like infatuated with her in his poems, kind of obsessed. And she replies, making fun of him for wanting a kiss of her and liking her. Clearly she was not interested. What strikes me as so interesting is that the men of the time knew that it was a man's world, and you know, Aşık Çelebi notes that although she's a woman, when there is no man in the field of men, she's two women. Aşık Çelebi was actually Müeyyedzade's grandson, so the man who supposedly maybe loved her and had a relationship with her. One really important aspect of poetry at the time was the mejlis. The mejlis was a gathering of artists and poets. It was really important because it introduced people, it networked. It's kind of like our conferences, our academic conferences today, where we go, we read these papers, and then our fellow academics, our peers, find out about us, they find out about our research, and that was what a majlis was, but for poetry. It was very physical and there was a lot of visibility, so Ottoman norms of visibility would have restricted women from inclusion in these. We don't know if there were any women-only majlises because these were places where poetry was read aloud. We can say that these women-only majlises did exist because there were women poets and poetry was supposed to be performed in this era, not just read on paper. And Mihri's own poems suggest that there were areas where she could perform. She writes about a sick visit, that she had to visit someone who was ill and just perform poetry. So that's really interesting. And we know that it wasn't really natural for women to be in these circles because Latifi and Ashok Chelebi constantly need to justify her being included. They're like, oh, but she was this good and she was chaste and she was this, and it's like, because people are going to question what is a woman doing here? A lot of poets and poetry at the time described women in derogatory terms. They made a comparison between women and manipulation and worldliness. So really, woman had negative connotations, and although Mihri really never talks about womanliness or femininity in her poems, she counters this idea. So her colleagues tried to represent her as a beloved, as the passive one. Mihri resisted these efforts to make her the object. She wanted to be the subject. She wanted to be the lover. She wanted to be dominant. But these were all qualities that men and male poets were supposed to have. And so she challenges these conventions of her time by taking on the role of a male speaker. Like many of the women of her time, she was working within a male-dominated society and a male-dominated art, one that was constantly trying to push her down. And she was successful. 600 years on, she's still remembered. I want to leave you with a question. If Mihri was a man, would she have been remembered differently? Would her poetry still be seen as something ahead of its time, or would it have just been seen as natural artistic expression? Let me know what you think, and I'll leave you with one of Mihri's beautiful poems.